Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is Shady Atia and today's presentation is about article-based PhD. The presentation is a part of a playlist on doing a PhD. I hope you watched previous videos and future videos. Now, the audience of today's presentation is mainly potential PhD students and PhD candidates. And the objective here is to explain the key features of an article-based dissertation and the process of preparing your manuscript. I'm going to talk about, in short introduction, the process and planning of your article-based PhD, what will be the structure, the originality and the contribution, authorship and copyright before some takeaway messages. So let's start with the what. What I'm talking here about? I'm talking here about an article-based dissertation in contrast to the monograph dissertation. A monograph dissertation or thesis is simply a document that is written fully and edited from the beginning and the end as a book. So you have the first introduction chapter, literature review, then you have a follow-up with the methodology, then you have your results, discussion, and conclusion. And in this sense, even if you published a work, this work will be re-edited and embedded in this new monograph. This is the monograph-based PhD. I'm not going to talk about it. This was in the previous presentation. Today, I'm talking about the article-based, where we are going to only write an introduction and literature review section. We will include published work, and then we have a discussion conclusion chapter, and that's it. So, article-based dissertations are alternatives to traditional monographs, and they end up without having at the end a book. Writing the dissertation as a collection, they are most of the time written as a collection of published articles, minimum 2 to 3 Q1 published articles, and maybe one more will be under submission, without re-editing them. Allow me to reiterate, without re-editing them. The paper should be published since the student's registration as a doctoral student. So you cannot include a master thesis work that was published during your PhD as part of your PhD. You cannot include a published work that was published during your PhD based on work that was done prior to your PhD. When we talk here about published work, it is published work related to your research proposal conducted during your PhD study and since your enrollment. You cannot take something from the past, publish it in the present, and use it in your dissertation. If you want to know more about Q1 publication and Q1 articles, I advise you to check a previous video on selecting a journal for publication. Now allow me to move to the second part about the process and the planning of my article-based PhD. First of all, how should I start? First thing I have to do, I have to discuss with my supervisor the idea. Don't expect that all supervisors will welcome the idea, because many supervisors are old school, they don't like it and they don't enjoy it. They want to read this old monograph with a narrative, with a storytelling, a thick book of 200 pages, 300 pages, and they want to have it the old way, like they wrote their own dissertation. So you will find resistance. First thing, you get a green light from your promoters, inquire about your doctoral school and postgraduate school rules. This is very important. And for sure, make sure that the article-based dissertation is common in your discipline and that you read or have access to published dissertation. If you are the first one who do it in your community, in your department, in your university, I rather recommend you not to do it, because then you will have huge resistance. You will meet a lot of dinosaurs who are not looking forward to have such type of dissertations. But if it's a common practice, it's starting to become common, there are some rules, you get a green light from promoter, their understanding on the doctoral school level, then I advise you to proceed. Now you need to plan after getting the approval from your promoter and checking the regulation of your school. Make sure that your PhD is part of a project. This is my advice, so that you can have a fully funded PhD and then you are working 100% full-time on their PhD. Because when it's part of a project consortium, everybody understands that the deliverables will be publications. Most probably you are working on a very advanced topic. The topic can be easy allowing to publications, and you will be in a field that is encouraging the publication and the productivity. Also, it's important to make sure that your project design, the work package, deliverables can be published. And finally, you will end up at the end of every deliverable a published work. If you end up every time a work package with a report, no way that you get easy published, because then you work for doing the report and then you do a double work for publication. But if the research design from the beginning of your project was ending up with the deliverables for each work packages as a journal publication, then already you have a win-win and you're on the right track. Now, it's very important to publish only in Q1. When we talk about article-based journal papers, we are talking about journal paper with impact factor. What is Q1 peer-reviewed journals? These are journals that have a ranking, it's a ranking system, and simply you're talking here about the top 25% of the best journals worldwide. So make sure that you are publishing your articles in these Q1 journals with an impact factor, and normally the number varies. The minimum is 3 journal articles, minimum, never less than 3, and it can go up to 5 or 6. But for you, just focus on 3. You need to have 3 published articles. At least 2 of them should be published already, and maybe 1 can be submitted or in the submission process. This is accepted, and for sure you hardly find any university that putting strict rules. If you go check your university rule, I bet you that they will not tell you exactly what is the minimum rule, because they want to keep it flexible. We are in a transition and many people don't want to make a lot of restriction. But all what we can tell you now, you need to make sure that you have minimum 2 published in a Q1 and a third also in a Q1, at least published or in a submission process. Now, how should I publish 3 articles during my PhD? If your PhD is 3 years, it will be difficult. If it's 4 years, it's possible. So this means that I have to start with developing an aggressive publication strategy. I need to define 3 to 5 key research questions that can form later on answers. The publication will become the answer for these questions so that I can use them in my storytelling and I use them in my narrative, and then I can publish the maximum 1 review paper among those 3 papers. So it's no way that you have 2 review paper and 1 technical and then you say I want to have a paper based. If you do review paper, literature review I mean, or a state of the art, it can be only 1 out of the 3. Do your best to be the first author, because it's expected that you will be at least a first author on 2 of the 3 articles, and publish your results or methodology as soon as possible so that you are getting rid of the burden of rewriting all this methodology section if possible. So if you have already journal if 2 journal articles paper are not submitted in the first 2 years, I think you should skip the whole idea. So these are all advices to know if you can do it or not. Year 2 is finished, at least 1 should be published and the second is in the review process. If year 2 is finished and you don't have these conditions, forget about it, go for a monograph. Now, congratulations, you have 2 are published already and you are going in the 3rd and you are now preparing your manuscript. How should I structure my manuscript and how can I keep a red thread of storytelling? Logically, we always use this classical structure. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Introduction, Literature Review. Sometimes we merge Chapter 1 and 2 if we already have a literature review, a publication. If not, it's preferable to do a separate introduction, separate literature review. Then we can have the Chapter 3, 4, 5 representing publication 1, 2, 3. And then Chapter 6 will be the conclusion, the discussion. Most of the case, we merge conclusion discussion. Sometimes some promoters wish to have a separate discussion, separate conclusion, but because already the 3 chapters include a discussion, it is not worth it to make another chapter of discussion. So my conclusion simply, 1 introduction, 1 state of the art, the 3 chapter, and a final chapter, discussion and conclusion. Now for the introduction chapter, I advise you to keep it concise. Make sure that you are explaining the aims, the research problem, the research questions, and you are making sure that here where you are going to build up the red thread and the justification and the logical reasoning of your work. So here you'll start to pose your questions so that when we read the articles, we say, ah, wow, these articles correspond to these research questions. And as I told you, make at least 3 to 5 research questions and make sure that the answers to the research question form the red thread of your work. Now for the literature review, it's up to you. Like I told you, if you have a literature review paper, you skip this chapter. If not, I always recommend to have a literature review chapter. Here you should define your problem statement, the research gap, similar studies, and you make sure that the research gap and the importance of your research is articulated and what is the added value that you are expected to bring by answering the research question. So this is for the second chapter, or the literature review chapter. Now when it comes to the result, there won't be a result chapter, but there will be instead the 3 papers included. Each paper would be normally comprising a separate chapter. If anybody of the editors, especially the dinosaurs, if anybody of the reviewers, especially who are not used to article-based, start to tell you to modify the published article, don't take this comment. You need to include any modification in the discussion. So a published article should be kept as it is. Should there be any need for additional discussion, like I told you, then it has to be included at the end of the final chapter. Never re-edit your published papers. Once you re-edit your published paper, this is not an article-based PhD. And this need to be made very clear to the supervisor, need to be very clear made to all examiners. If those people are asking to re-edit the published article, this is not an article-based PhD. And this is the most frustrating thing that can happen with any young researcher, PhD, writing his or her PhD. So be consistent and be firm, and you need to resist that, and you need to explain to people that article-based, we don't re-edit the articles. Now, how can I put my article in this chapter? Actually, you need always to have a cover page. In this cover page, you put the article title, the abstract of your article, then you have a co-author statement, then a publication status statement, then you put the ranking or the journal citation report, and then finally the reference of your citation. So allow me to take you through. Co-author statement is a simple statement that says, I hereby declare that I am aware that the work in this chapter, which I am co-author, will form a part of my PhD dissertation. I contributed to the work in this research phase in the following way: major contributor, proportional contribution, minor contribution. And as I told you, 2 of the 3, you must be major contributor or main co-author at least, and I recommend to have at least the 3, you are the main author. If you are putting paper 4, 5, or 6, that can be a conference paper or a journal paper, those are additional, 3+, then you can be a co-author. You can be last or middle or whatever. Then after the co-authorship statement, publication status, you have to say either the paper is published or submitted, and then you have the journal citation report with the ranking saying that it has an impact factor, what is the impact factor, and what is the main statistical data about this journal. And finally, you cite the whole reference with an active link to the DOI. So this is the cover page. Those are the minimum requirement in this chapter of your publication. Now comes the question, what should I do after? There is 3 options that you can do. Option 1, results if you make no appendix. If your article-based dissertation has no appendix, you are allowed in this case to put directly the journal publication as it is after the cover page. But you need to make sure that the laws in your country and in your institution allow you to publish the article as it is, violating the copyright if you have a non-open access paper, and that you will be protected. In Belgium, this is possible. In Belgium, you can put a cover page directly followed by the journal paper as it is. And this can be also at the end publicly available in a public depository. So here we are talking that the publication directly as it is, the print, the produced from the publisher, is following the cover page. This is called article-based, no appendix. So I'm putting directly the paper in the chapter. Now, if you cannot do that, because in some countries, like in Germany, you cannot do that. You cannot put the copyrighted version with the layout that was provided by the publisher, because this is considered as a violation, and they don't have a law that protect researchers. In Belgium, it's possible. In Germany, it's not possible. In the United States, it's not possible. In Canada, it's not possible. What should I do in this case? I can move to option 2. No, I have to move to option 3. But allow me first to take you to option 2. Option 2 is that instead of putting my article or my journal publication directly following my cover page, I will only put the cover page, and then I will group all publication into an appendix. This is another option that can be done. This is still possible, and you have to have the right to make your PhD if you want to make it an open access format. But if you are not having this law that we have in Belgium, if you are, for example, Germany, or like I said, most countries outside Europe, then you can put the PhD in the appendix at the end. Here is a PhD, for example. This is a PhD of a PhD candidate. His name is Juan Carlos Gamero Salinas. He has the introduction, chapter, state of the art, then chapter 1 summary, chapter 2 summary, and then we don't see the paper, and then finally discussion. Okay? But at the end of the PhD here, in the appendix, you can see here, let me show you, after here, appendix A, then you can see the paper from the editor. In this case, this is called article-based dissertation with appendix. So you are grouping all the publication at the end. Still, you cannot put this PhD online because you are still violating the author copyrights. So this cannot be done in Germany. In this case, this paper can be, this PhD can be published, but it can be only available on an internal repository. It cannot be public format because you are putting your articles at the end, and you're making them available while you are violating copyright rules of the publisher. So it's important to take into account that option 1, no appendix, whether you put the publication with the cover page in the middle of the dissertation, or you put it at the end in an appendix at the end, both choices require that either you have a copyright law violation that protects you. This is happening in Belgium, for example. If not, then you can do it, but then the paper cannot be public because you are allowing others to access a subscription-based paper, especially if it's not open access, through your PhD, and this is not allowed, using the layout format of the publisher. Now, what is then the solution? Finally, I can come to the part I like. Option 3. Result, restricted or separated appendix. What does this mean? I will have introduction, literature review, cover page, cover page, cover page, discussion. This part of the PhD can be public. And there is a restricted appendix. A non-published appendix. Look at this. I have another PhD here. Very interesting. They did this game. You can see here at the PhD, it is including chapter 1, chapter 2, only the cover pages, discussion, conclusion, and then the appendix, separate document. In the appendix, you can see all the papers published by the publishing house, but they are not publicly available. Restricted. So by that, this is the third option. You create an appendix, you group all your work, and this appendix is not published, it's not accessible. So when you share your PhD, you share it only with the cover page in the middle, chapter 3, 4, 5, but no appendix. So whether you go for option 1, that you have it without the appendix, and the papers are embedded in the manuscript, or you separate it in an appendix, but it is accessible internally restricted, or you totally separate it and do not allow people to access, these are all options you have to figure out depending on the context where you live. But again, to make the clear message, introduction, literature review, cover page, cover page, cover page. After that, it's up to you to include the original version or not. If you have problem with copyright, put them all in an appendix and make it restricted access, only accessible for the jury during the examination, and after that nobody can access. And finally, you get out of this conflict, and by that, you are not going to re-edit your articles. Again, allow me to iterate on that. So those are the 3 options. Make sure that you form a cohesive body at the end of the day. Select only relevant publications. It's not that you're making a list. I have a PhD student I know, I don't want to put his name, but he is unbelievable. He will put anything he published in, even irrelevant. This is wrong. Select, be selective. What are the most relevant? 3 relevant publications, journal, are better than 4 or 5. Reduce the time of reading your thesis. It should be led by you should be the lead author, and you have to maintain the red thread. So at the end, whether you do no appendix, with appendix, restricted access to your appendix, all these 3 options, whatever you select, at the end of the day, there must be a logical storytelling, and therefore we always recommend you to publish in open access. Because if you publish from the beginning in open access, you will not have any problem by putting the paper as it is in the chapters. But if it's not an open access format, you have to turn around by putting an appendix and making this appendix at the end separate document with a restricted access. So these are all options and alternatives you need to figure out. Allow me to finish the presentation, but moving first on the originality and the contribution. When you reach the discussion and conclusion, you must talk about originality and contribution. What is the added value of your PhD? I need to find it. The main requirement for a PhD thesis are originality and whether it makes a significant contribution to knowledge. I need to see that explicitly mentioned through points with a reasoning, minimum 1 or 2 pages written fully, talking about what is the originality of this PhD, and this has to be in the discussion section. Also, I need to know how this work is distinguished within the scientific community. What makes this different in regard to what was published previously in your scientific community? Very important, this discussion to be elaborated, and it's not an easy discussion to be written, it needs time. Also, you need to list the key findings and highlight them, the key contribution of your work, and put very clear, straightforward recommendation for future research. By that, your discussion and conclusion section is well done. Now moving to the final part, authorship and copyright. Like I told you before, make sure that you are the first author and the corresponding author for at least 2 out of the 3 published articles, if not all. Only 1 article of the thesis can be presented in the form of co-authorship. The number varies minimum from 3 to 5 published articles. The normal expectation is that 3 journal papers will be published, and you can include 1 to 2 submitted papers as part of that. Like we said before, don't forget, article-based dissertation will not be a book. You will not publish a book. The journal retains the copyright ownership of the article in its current format. So if you put this article, and if it's not in open access, you are violating the law. The only way, 2 options. Either you have a national law that overrides this copyright agreement, or you put your manuscript as a restricted access in the appendix at the end of the manuscript, and you only include the cover page for each chapter that indicates what is inside these chapters. Also, the PhD student and his or her university should retain the ownership of the content. You are owners of the content, but you are not owners of the form. Of this form, no. The content is yours. Without legal protection, you can't include your published article in an open access dissertation. This is very important to take into account. So by this, I end up today's presentation. Some takeaway messages. Writing an article-based PhD requires that you publish 3 journal articles by end of the year, 2, maximum 3, 2 if you have 3 years. If you are in the year 3 in the beginning, it's okay if you have a 4-year PhD. All school professors don't like these type of article-based dissertation. Dinosaurs, they don't like this type of article-based dissertation. So don't invite dinosaurs to your committee. Some recommendations: plan your PhD project early and get a written approval from your promoter. Written approval. Never tell me, he told me by the phone, we were in an informal meeting and he or she confirmed I come. It must be written. Promoters can change their mind in a second. Written approval that they support the idea of having an article-based dissertation. Publish your articles in Q1 journals as soon as possible. Research design is key. Make sure your research design is cohesive, integrated, and that you have research questions that build on each other so that paper 1 Paper 2 is a follow-up of paper 1. Paper 3 is a follow-up of paper 2, not a mixed, unrelevant, non-connected publication strategy. Respect the copyright requirements, and if you cannot publish the article as it is, if it's not in an open access format, respect the publisher, put it in an appendix, restricted access, and forget about a book. And for sure, clarity is important regarding the co-authorship. You will find committee members in the jury just nagging and nagging about what was your role in this paper, what was your contribution in this paper. So from the beginning, in your cover page statement, you say explicitly major contribution, proportional contribution, minor contribution, and you sign it so that everybody knows what you did exactly. And today, most journals, they will already include a part that mentions what are the roles of every contributor of the paper in the co-authorship chain, so that anybody who is inspecting or not trusting that you did this work, they can be assured. And for sure, expect resistance. The final remark, expect resistance from everybody, and don't re-edit your articles. If you re-edit it, it's not an article-based PhD. Guys, enjoy. Don't hesitate to watch previous and following up videos. I'm very curious about your comments. Comment the video, share, compliment my work, put any question, take a training about it, but don't hesitate to come back to this video and consider it as a reference so that we all can have a collective knowledge about this new and interesting way of publishing that is effective and efficient, and it valorizes already the publication and makes it easier for many people who most of the time have still another step in their career to do, focusing on the postdoc or focusing on the next transition to industry or in academia. So by that, I hope that this video was useful. Don't hesitate to share it with others. Today's presentation was about article-based PhD. Thank you very much for bearing with me, and good luck with your work.